So very briefly, let me introduce myself. I'm Kamal Kapadia. I'm co-founder and chief learning officer at Terra.do. Terra.do is an online global climate school and community, and our goal is to get hundreds of millions of people working on climate change, so train them up and get them deployed into the workforce. Let me introduce our panelists today. I think we have 3 panelists here, and hopefully our 4th one will be joining. So let me just introduce all 4 of them. We have Grant Canary, founder and CEO at DroneSeed. We have Julia Kumari Drapkin, who I hope will be joining very soon. She's CEO and founder at IC Change. We have Chris Peacock, CEO and founder at Aqua Oso Technologies, and Jason Yoho, Chief Commercial Officer at Second Nature Software. So let's jump right into some questions. And Jason, I'm going to start with you. Let's start with infrastructure and resilience in infrastructure. So as we know, the Biden administration just announced a huge $2 trillion infrastructure plan, which also in so many ways is both a climate mitigation and a resilience plan and an ambitious environmental justice initiative. So can you talk to us a little bit about infrastructure vulnerabilities, especially in the context of climate change, sea level rise, flooding risk, etc.? What are these risks? Who is really facing these risks most acutely? And how can tech and specifically the work that you're doing help us build infrastructure resilience?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Wonderful question. Giant question, of course. So way to start it off with the big one. I really appreciate it. Also, thank you to Cody and all of Techstars. Second, it's good to see a lot of peers and cohort folks that we know from our Nature Conservancy Techstars sustainability program. Really excited about that. Very happy to be here. I appreciate the question a lot. Of course, at Second Nature Software, we focus on stormwater infrastructure. And we choose to focus on stormwater infrastructure really for 3 reasons. Firstly, stormwater runoff into our urbans, streams, lakes, bays is the fastest growing source of urban pollution in the United States. Secondly, there's a lot of money being spent annually on stormwater programs in the US. According to the most recent Water Environment Federation or WEF Stormwater Institute survey, it's about $42 billion a year is spent programmatically in the US on stormwater infrastructure and programs. And then thirdly, it's a regulated requirement for all municipalities to have a stormwater program in place and attempt to do a better job at reducing the amount of pollution that reaches their urban waters. So to kind of get into your question a little bit, the baseline stormwater infrastructure risk in the US is high, and it's high because of the simple fact that there's a lot of it. There's about $400 billion worth of infrastructure in the ground across the country. Much of it is old, and a lot of it is beyond its service life. Some of it is decades beyond, even half a century beyond its service life. So, of course, that risk increases for that infrastructure when environmental factors associated with climate risk are weighed in. The greater frequency of severe rain events, drought, wildfire impact, all of these things have an influence on the natural hydrology of the environment. So stormwater flow and volume increases, and it brings sediment and pollution with it as it goes through our urban areas where people live. The frequency of flood events is increasing. According to FEMA, pretty much every county in the US is impacted by a flood event over the past 25 years. So to translate that into the real world, what that means at the local level is that urban floods often are occurring more frequently, and they're often doing that in areas with the highest amount of impervious surface. So many of those areas of our communities with high impervious surface are areas where there's a lot of pavement, and they happen to be socially and economically disadvantaged portions of our communities. And so what we see at a national level then is FEMA, for example, they're spending about $3 billion a year on their annual flood risk insurance. So very real impacts at the local level, at the federal level. And so what we see is technology can play a number of roles in this equation. From Second Nature's perspective and a software perspective, working with municipalities, what we're finding is the cloud can play a central role in and of itself. At all levels of government, we see a digital transformation occurring, the cloud moving in, really embracing this kind of software as a service base of technology that really allows us to start centralizing information, centralizing data, in the case of stormwater infrastructure related to stormwater assets and programmatic information. Secondly, stormwater programs and the infrastructure that's under the ground in our municipalities is obviously very distributed. So we can use geographic information systems to gather and understand geographic related information about those assets, like where they're located, what their condition is, how they're performing relative to their design specification. Are they capturing the volume of water that we designed them to? Are they reducing the amount of pollution or sediment that we designed them to do? And then lastly, that provides an excellent platform for really inserting in science-driven information making tools. And this is what Second Nature is really grabbing onto, is the ability to bring best-in-class stormwater-related methods and models and use all of that cloud-based data, that GIS-based data, and inform it with science so that the people who are running these programs on a daily, weekly, annual basis, so at the watershed level, planners are able to make more informed decisions around where are the best places in our communities to make investments. So tying that back to the idea that the Biden administration is investing massively, really once in a lifetime level investment in new infrastructure. Much of that's going to take the form of transportation. Of course, our roads, our highways, our freeways are very important conduits for stormwater. We can all drive around and we can see large basins at the side of a freeway or something like that. They're also focusing how that money gets spent to really try and get the best bang for the buck, or a return on investment, so that those dollars are going to build green infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, in areas where there's an opportunity to reduce flood risk, or where there's an opportunity to potentially create green space, and do that in a way that takes into account social economic factors as well as hydrology, stormwater, flood risk factors. These are the types of things then that really start to move the needle from an environmental justice standpoint, potentially, and and ultimately start building more resilient communities, more healthy communities.
Thanks so much, Jason. I sort of feel the significance of what you're talking about quite acutely, because I'm on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, and last month we had this really dramatic flooding event where for the first time in anyone's sort of living memory, at least, they had to evacuate an entire town on the North Shore. So this is extremely relevant to where I am, and my family lives in Mumbai, super relevant to where they are, and it's just relevant everywhere. So I really appreciate that.
Of course.
That perspective. Let's move on to Julia now. And so we've talked about municipalities and infrastructure resilience. I really want to spend a little bit of time thinking about the role of communities. And so when we're talking about climate disasters, climate resilience, communities are sort of at the center of this. What is their, what are their vulnerabilities? What is their role in building resilience? And what are you doing with IC Change to sort of really, help them participate in important planning decisions, other decisions around resilience? And welcome, Julia. Nice to have you join us.
Thank you so much. I was in the audience and I was having trouble getting back in. So wonderful to have this conversation with y'all. So yes, IC Change is a climate data platform where local leaders, engineers, and utilities and the public build solutions together. And our engagement and data platform is premised on the very simple and important critical idea that everyday people have critical insights and data to contribute to solutions. Because when we are designing with data and data modeling, those data models, every hydrology model I've worked on, every heat model I've worked on has massive errors. Extend that into drought, wildfire risk, emissions reductions. And what we have found is that communities have that everyday experience when paired with measurements, stories, and data that can actually ground truth and validate those models and infrastructure projects. So user-generated insights and hyperlocal data that on our platform around flood infrastructure, just like Jason, we have the same clients. However, our data has actually not only quadrupled public engagement to the people who are most impacted by climate change and are least heard from. We've actually proven models wrong and moved $4.8 million into low-income neighborhoods where the flood maps were underestimating their risk. And it doesn't matter if it's a next-gen satellite or a sensor, those errors matter when it comes to the design of those projects. And in terms of spending the money correctly and making the most of these opportunities, we need their insights to be a part of the process and to be taken seriously. So we can often use science as a mechanism to disempower residents in their experiences. Oh, the data says this, the model says this, that's why we're going to make that decision. And when you bring communities into the process, not only are you going to get better results, you're going to get more equitable insights and data into design. You're actually going to get more participation and buy-in, and you're going to get the public trust that is otherwise missing when it comes to these projects. And the public can really derail your project. I've seen it happen. So when it comes to infrastructure and all of the mistakes that we've made, going back to the 1930s with redlining, going back to how we've sourced and cited our chemical corridors and industrial sites, you need community members to be a part of those processes. Otherwise, you risk recreating the inequities that have gotten us here today. So we've actually been able to do that across heat work. We've been doing that in energy efficiency work. We've demonstrated that the National Weather Service is not alerting residents about heat risk in the ways they need to be in certain neighborhoods. And that offers opportunities for not only emissions reductions through energy efficiency targeted interventions, but non-energy health benefits, where people are really going to be improving their quality of life. And again, it's really reaching the people here from the least to be part of these public processes. They're not paid to be members of NGOs. They have kids, they work nights. They're not available for your meetings. So we provide this seamless way for them to iteratively engage over time. And in some cases, they're hosting sensors. In some cases, they're measuring flood height. In some cases, they're measuring rain intensity, which is a huge issue when it comes to flood risk. And we've been able to seamlessly do that using equity as the point of focus and generating technical data that generates better results.
Thanks so much, Julia. As you were speaking, I was thinking that the kind of work you're doing would have, I would think, even more relevance in developing countries. I'm not sure if you're operating there, but those are places where it's not even a question that the data is wrong, but often the data is just missing. And I've spoken to many people who just say, like, the models, it's just really hard to sort of actually even like make any sense of the models just because they're actually lacking data. So you can see sort of communities providing that data firsthand when it's actually entirely lacking.
Yes, actually, the platform is free for anyone in the world to use. We have users in 118 countries. You can download the IC Change app right now on your phone and tell us a story. Tell us what you've been seeing in your backyard. It's not just doom and gloom. Show us solutions. If you all have, all you founders, if you've got great solutions, you want to share some photos and stories on IC Change, go for it. Have a chat. But in terms of our clients, we have most of our clients are in the United States. Most of them are municipalities, engineering firms, and utilities. But we're always open to working anywhere around the world and would welcome it for sure. There's a lot of data gaps, and that can make a big difference when you augment them.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Julia. I'm going to pop over to Chris now, because one of the things you mentioned was about sort of shifting investment into the places that it needs to go, and sort of that brings us, we've touched upon municipalities, we've touched upon communities, and I want to spend a few minutes thinking about finance. So let's talk about the role of financial institutions. So Chris, can you help us understand a little bit about how financial institutions, which we know are very powerful actors in our society, how can they help bring about change in this world of resilience, and how does your work help enable this?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us. This is really great to be here, sharing the stage with some friends from my garage. Financial institutions really do play a major role in building resiliency. In fact, I met this morning with the American Bankers Association and their ESG working group, who are all exploring this very topic. We at Alcosa believe that financial institutions are a critical linchpin in building a water and climate resilient future. They're in a really unique position to help their customers mitigate risk, but also adapt to climate change. They can build advanced financial products to mitigate against major climate events. They can design loan products with dynamic interest rates that take into account various climate risks, and that can help fund adaptation. Really, financial institutions underpin the economic tools that our communities and small businesses and individuals need in order to make lasting change. They can, we think, enable behavioral change at scale. And certainly we could have like a robust dialogue about how broken our financial system might be and how the traditional financial system is being challenged by decentralized finance, which is like a great movement that strengthens the need for traditional banks to really do better. But I will say this, the 30+ financial institutions that we work with today really are looking for ways to make their customers successful. They want to help fund resilient strategies and operations. At Aquaoso, we help banks, investors, and national food brands understand water risk in their loans, investments, and their supply chains through our water security platform. A lot of times people like to think of us as a credit score for water. But banks and investors use our data to identify water risk in their loan and investment portfolios, but they're also working with us collaboratively to use our data to build incentive-based loan and insurance products. So these are products that can help farmers adapt to a changing climate for things like converting to organic or regenerative farming, and even retiring farmland to restore critical habitat. So of course, all of this takes really good information and data and analytics. Macro level climate models give us some baselines to work within, as Julia mentioned, but we also have to have and collect operational level data, right? Data at the ground and ground truth, a lot of what's going on. And in the case for water risk for agricultural lenders, that means understanding water variability in the context of various loans, geographies, and of course, land uses. But ultimately, no matter how much data we gather, any incentive program needs to be well designed if it's going to have a lasting impact. And we think that making decisions in silos with sloppy data is just like a bygone era with all of the tech that we have available to us. In order for us to really bring about, I think, deep and lasting change, collaborations need to exist across the financial sector, across governmental agencies, NGOs, local communities, and tech firms like us on the stage and out in the audience. But in short, we're super encouraged by the work that we've already done with financial institutions and their ability to enable a water and climate resilient future.
That's really important, Chris. Thanks a lot for sharing. And I was also recently on a conversation with somebody at HSBC, and they're a huge bank, 250,000 people, and exactly like you mentioned, they're all trying to figure this out. So it's really important work that you're doing. Let's go to Grant, and Grant, let's kind of we've talked a fair amount about water here, especially. Let's talk about forests. So let's talk specifically about like both in terms of mitigation and adaptation opportunities, like what's going on, and how is your work with drone seed helping kind of working at this intersection and helping both on the mitigation and on the sequestration and on the adaptation side.
Absolutely. So first, let's explain what we do. Like, we utilize heavy lift drone swarms. The drone swarms, after a wildfire, go out and they reforest. There's a lot to that, but that's the shorthand. We work with 3 of the 5 largest timber companies. We work with tribal nations. We work with nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, and then the state and federal governments. We get paid per acres of service. That's one way we do it. But the other way we do it is with carbon credits. And so carbon credits allow us to double landowner investment by putting an easement on the land, getting the carbon credits on carbon credit futures. And that, what do they do? What does the landowner do with that? Well, most of the time they use it to reforest the other 95% of their land that's burned. So this is what's been happening in the space for a long time with everybody from tribal nations to big timber companies, but they've been doing it with existing stands of timber. In the last 18 months, what's emerging is we can do this now with burned land and take all the calculations we used to use for how many 2x4s are we going to get from this species of tree in this region of Oregon. And now we can calculate to say, well, we can convert that over into weight of carbon. And so that's a carbon credit future, and utilize a lot of the same methodologies that we've seen in green building, which is like U.S. Green Building Council or others, a third party that's out there that's creating a methodology that doesn't rely on government, has independent third-party verification, and then allows that transparency in the whole process. But the big problems that we're seeing out there are, there's 4 problems for resiliency in forestry. Number 1 is the tools for labor. People are superheroes doing wind sprints with 40-pound packs of 1 to 2 year old seedlings. They burn the caloric equivalent of running 2 marathons every day at work. This is not sustainable work. So let's get them better tools. That's where the drones come in. Number 2, we have this really long supply chain. Paradise Fire, November of 2018. Well, we're just starting to get to it after growing seedlings in a nursery for 1 to 2 years in 2020. 2020 fire season rolls around. Well, boom, another 5-year backlog in reforestation capacity. And so people can see the Wired article, the National Geographic and Nature Conservancy, where they're saying, like, look, we want to plant 1 trillion trees. Like, where are the trees going to come from? Where's the seed going to come from? And that's the next problem, which is, where is the seed going to come from? And so that's something we're going to have some announcements coming out on soon. And then the last one is, where does the money come from? And that's really where the carbon credits come in. So ex-ante carbon credits, Apple announced today, $200 million fund for reforestation. Well, that's a great fit for what we're up to and what the entire sector needs, which is, what's that financial flywheel behind reforesting? Because if I could have people walk away with anything from this presentation, it's that wildfires, because of climate change, are more severe, and that we are not seeing nature doing nearly as much reforestation as we previously have. And that means the whole system that we built for reforesting with orchards and nursery and seed collection is completely not up to the task. And so what's happening then is, we see on site, like, it used to be moderate to high severity fires were 6 to 9% of fires in the Northwest. Now it's 36%. And that's the stuff that is not going to grow back. So we all learned in, like, high school bio, like, forest burns, forest regrows. Well, like, check that knowledge now. Like, forest burns, it only regrows 60% of the time. In some regions, American Forest is putting out there, it's only regrowing 40% of the time. So if we don't have better tools soon, we're simply triaging forest loss. And there's some skepticism about, like, trees aren't a silver bullet. Like, we can't be bought off with trees by large corporations. Sure, yes, but also, if we want to continue to have any trees, like, we better be investing in it in a big way. And so I think those are some of the things that I have people, like, think about and contemplate as far as, like, moving forward. And I'll be happy to post some of the Wired articles in the chat here, but the Wired article and the Nat Geo and others that have been coming out. And for folks that are looking like, great, cool, we love drone seed, we also want to take more action. There's the Save Our Seedlings Act that just got introduced in Congress, and there's also Trillion Trees, and that just got introduced in Congress. So those are both proceeding legislation where people have direct access to U.S. legislators if they're voting. So that's one big way people can make an impact.
Thanks so much, Grant. And I want to also say that I think even locally in states and communities, there's all kinds of initiatives, because I know that there's a lot going on around tree planting in Hawaii as well. So, I mean, that's another place to look. It's just sort of, opportunities around you with nonprofits and other groups. But I really had never thought about where the seeds are going to come from. That's really fascinating. That's a really big, important question. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'd love to see the links. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I hope it's okay for us to spend another 2 minutes. And if we could just go down the room, and if you could each take 30 seconds to give your sort of one piece of advice to entrepreneurs looking to build resilience. I hope we're not going to get cut off. I don't think so. I think we're just gonna sneak in here and spend a couple of extra minutes. So I'll go in the same order. We'll just start with you, Jason, and then just go around.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but I can tell you, I think kind of from a starting point, one of my suggestions would be focus on building a good business. Have a sustainability, have an impact idea, make it integral, make it maybe your entire business, but focus on building the fundamentals of a good business. I think there's a very healthy, very growing community of investors that are excited about early investments and growth investments. What we need to do as entrepreneurs is we need to build technology-based, sustainable, impact-based businesses that are worthy of long-term return.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Julia, you want to add some words?
Sure. Be bold. Speak truth. We need to make money, but we also don't have time for bullshit. So call it out when you see it, because people need to hear how to make it work and do it better. And if anyone wants to talk to me, I'll be in the Startup Expo next, and I'm happy to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Julia. Chris?
Yeah, I think really great advice from both Jason and Julia. I would go with building your own internal resilience as well, because startup life is hard and building a company is hard. So understand what your true north is and kind of build that resilience into yourself and into the company as well.
Yeah, that's really so important, especially in the startup ecosystem. Yeah, kind of finding your balance and building your resilience. Thanks so much, Grant.
Yeah, I've done basically built 2 companies as the second one, and in both of them looked for feedback loops. And that's how the whole climate science was built with VenSim software, old school, and looking for like what are those like snowballs for people not familiar with like feedback loops and what they are, but how do they all connect? And then how can, with forests, if we're not seeing anything positive in reforestation happening from nature or from people, how do we then insert like a positive loop as opposed to a negative loop? And that's how I've built my business theses, whether it's been declining fish populations or increasing burn. How do we change that feedback loop? And so that's what I've looked for in the financial thesis in creating a company.
Thank you so much, Grant, and thank you all. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I've really learned a lot and really enjoyed meeting all of you and kind of just talking about resilience. I want to say thanks to Cody and Techstars for organizing this event, and I suggest everybody heads over to the Startup Expo to chat some more and keep learning. So thank you all, and see you in the Startup Expo.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.